I'm Nick Pettit.
I'm Jason Seifer.
And you're watching the Treehouse Show, your weekly dose of internets where we talk about all things web design, web development, and more.
In this episode, we'll be talking about icons, performance of popular JavaScript frameworks, design considerations with text on images, and more.
Let's check it out. First up is Evil Icons. This says it is a simple and clean SVG icon pack with the code to support Rails, Sinatra, and Node.js. I know that because it says it right here on the website. So convenient. Down here, they have the regular style of icons. You can get them in small, medium, or large sizes. I looked at these kind of carefully, and I don't really see any differences between the small, medium, and large sizes. And that's kind of interesting because they are SVGs. You would expect to see maybe differences in the line weight and things of that nature. And maybe there is. Maybe they're just so well designed I'm not noticing it, but you can get them in those different sizes. Then, of course, it is free and open, and I guess the regular style is the only style. So you can go ahead and click on Getting Started here. There's a number of ways to get this. You can use them with the Grunt plugin. Gulp is coming soon, and you can install them with Rails using the gem Evil Icons. And like it said earlier, it is available through Sinatra as well. Anyway, pretty cool stuff.
Maybe they're just misunderstood icons and not necessarily evil.
Maybe. It's possible. SVG is a really good way to go with icons because, of course, they are infinitely scalable and they have an infinite amount of resolution. So these are going to look good on Retina displays and high DPI devices, as well as devices that are just, I don't know, regular, pedestrian, we'll say. And, you know, they'll look good at all different screen resolutions. You can blow them up really big and they'll still look great. So definitely check this out because you do want to be using SVGs wherever possible.
Was there an icon for tact in that set?
I don't know what you're talking about, Jason.
Eye contact? Next up, we have an article on the performance of popular JavaScript frameworks. This article takes a look at the specific load times of Angular, Backbone, and Ember.js. Now, as we all know, speed matters, especially perceived website load speed, and that is what this article went into. What they did is they took the same application and they benchmarked the initial load time. And when I say the initial load time, that means the time it took for the JavaScript framework to get set up and load the initial application state, or render start. This is the moment in the web page test timeline view where the to-do applications UI first appears. Now, what they're saying is these tests can and can't tell us about certain things, and this is just intended to establish a best case scenario on initial load and render times for each framework. There are a ton of different variables to take into account when you are doing benchmarks and also choosing what framework to use. So what is the TLDR with the average first render time? Well, Backbone provided a consistent, quickest first render. Also, it had the smallest script size. So that is the immediate conclusion, but remember, there is a lot more to take into account when choosing a framework. However, this is interesting, so definitely take a little bit more in-depth look. They have a spreadsheet on there with how they did it, and they tested it across different devices as well.
So not necessarily an indicator of every application's performance, but definitely a good barometer of kind of where the performance might end up.
Exactly.
Very cool stuff. Well, next up is an article from CSS-Tricks called Design Considerations, Text on Images. Of course, putting text on top of images is very, very popular, such as in this advertisement for Treehouse. And down here, they have a couple different ways you can do that. So with this method, you might want to tint the image, and that's not totally obvious in terms of your run-of-the-mill CSS, the way you do it is you use multiple background images, but you can't just use any background image because you can't really use a solid color here. So you actually have to use a linear gradient, except your gradation is just from one color to the exact same color. And if you drop the opacity on both those colors, you'll get something like this. And of course, you can tint that any color that you want. Now, when you combine that with text, you get something like this. The suggestion here is to use white text whenever possible. In fact, that's almost always what you want to use. You might be able to get away with a light color, but in general, it's hard to put a darker color on top of any kind of photograph. There's full page images, so how do you do that? Well, in general, you'll set the background and then the background size property to the keyword cover, and that's going to do exactly what it sounds like. It's going to cover the page, and it may crop off parts of the image depending on the aspect ratio of the image and the viewport. And if you want this to maintain kind of just the top of the page, you can, and then have it sort of go away when you scroll down, so have it be cut off. You can do that by setting a height of 100 VH. So that will kind of measure the height of the viewport, and that's in percentage, so it'll be 100% of the viewport, and then when you scroll down, you'll see the rest of the web page. You could put text in a box just like this. So in general here, you can kind of do a light colored text on dark, or the other way around. Really doesn't matter because you're not quite as dependent on the image in this case. And then they also talk about blurring the backgrounds a little bit. That's pretty cool. One that I really like is what they're calling floor fade here. And that's where you have that same linear gradient, but you're going from top to bottom. And towards the bottom, you have the gradient a little bit darker than you do towards the top, and then you put your text down there. And it's a subtle effect. I believe Facebook does this, or at least they did for a little while. And you have sort of the darker part of the image down here. It's very subtle. You can't really tell that there's necessarily a gradient there, but it does make the text a lot more readable.
Kind of makes it pop.
It does. It makes the text pop. Very cool article. This is a lot of stuff that I've done from time to time on different websites, but I've never thought about it like this. It's really nice to kind of have it in a big list of all the different ways you can put text on top of an image. Really cool stuff.
Next up, we have a post called the Offline Cookbook. This is an extremely thorough blog post that talks all about app cache. App cache gives you the ability to have applications work when the browser is offline using service workers.
Oh, app cache. I thought that was just like another name for like venture capital, you know, getting cash to start your app idea.
We should trademark that.
Yeah, app cache.
But like spell it differently. Maybe leave out a letter or something.
Yeah.
So anyway, there are a lot of things to take into account when getting your website to work offline, and this all works using caching. Now, we're going to take a look at just a couple of these different things because there are a ton of different points in the process where you might have to cache something and also delete it from the cache. Now, what's great about this particular post is it tells you when you would want to use these different methods. For example, this one on the installation of an application. This is ideal for CSS, images, fonts, JavaScript, and templates, basically anything you'd consider static to that version of your site. So what happens is you go to the site, the service worker goes, the install event happens, it reaches out to the network, grabs what it needs, puts it inside of the cache, and then the activate event is fired. Now, this is the code that makes that all work. This works using promises. Now, here is another method. You can do this also on installation and not as a dependency. This is going to be ideal for bigger resources that aren't needed straight away, like assets for later levels of a game. So maybe the earlier levels you fetch initially and then wait for just a couple minutes and then get the bigger assets. And it shows you the code right there as well. Now there are, like I said, a ton of different scenarios where you might want to use these different caches or even delete the different caches. This isn't something that is going to be straight away available to use in all browsers. However, it should be landing in Chrome in January or February of 2015 or 015, as Nick says. We'll have a link in the show notes to this article. I recommend checking it out if you need to make your web app work offline.
That was so money. Next up is an article about responsive type. Of course, if you've ever tried to make type on a responsive website stretch all the way across
Haven't we all?
Viewport, it's a little bit tricky to do because on some devices it might break in different places and you might get stuff like this where it kind of drops down to the next line. And that may or may not be what you want. You might want the text to just go all the way across and completely fill the viewport no matter what the size of the device is. Well, how do you do that? There's a couple of different techniques, and most of them rely on setting dozens of breakpoints or using JavaScript. There's a lot of stuff that I've seen over the years, and they all work okay, but none of them are very simple, and they do tend to add a lot of code to your application or website. So what do? Well, there's actually a very simple solution, and it's to use this unit, and we talked about this earlier in the show, called Viewport Width or Viewport Height or Vmin or Vmax. And basically what this will do, if you have 1 VW, this is 1% of the viewport width. So this is a number between 1 and 100, and that's going to be a percentage of the viewport width and viewport height. Now, if you set this unit to the font size of some text, it will take the viewport width and apply that to the text as the different responsive sizes change.
Very clever.
What does that look like? Well, let's take a look at this demo here. And here is a demo on CodePen that's linked in the article. And I want you to check out this text here up at the top. If you resize the browser, well, the viewport width is changing. And that unit is based on the viewport width, so it also changes.
Did you write that copy?
I did not write this copy.
So would it be fair to say it's not your type?
It's not my type at all. Anywho, that's all we have time for this week. I am at NickRP on Twitter.
And I am at Jason Seifer. For more information on anything we talked about, check out the show notes right below this video. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we will see you next week.